Welcome to the Quebec and New England Railroad. This part of the YouTube homepage, the About page here, gives a bit of a description of the Q&NE and how it's operated. It also shows that we've hit a milestone here with just over 1 million views, and it's taken us 10 years to do that. The other interesting thing about this About page is that there are 2 links on the bottom. These are for the track plans of the layout. It's a 2-level layout. So one is the visible layout, and the other is the hidden or lower level staging. We'll take a look at that first. This sheet here, and you can print these. This sheet here shows that there's 2 helices, one here and the other one here, and these provide an opportunity for trains to have a continuous run. If I like to have trains running continuously, that's what they would do. But you also see 2 staging yards here, and these are in loop designs, and here. And this one here is the east staging. It's only 4 tracks long, but they're very long tracks. They can probably handle 50-car trains, although I don't usually run trains that long. But this allows trains leaving the layout, the operating session, in one direction to return and be lined up for the opposite direction. So we have one for either end. So this is like true theater staging. Leaving the stage to the left or leaving the stage to the right, you can come back in the opposite direction. So that works very well for us. 5 staging tracks here. There's more staging tracks here because this is a combination of west staging for both Conrail trains and the Quebec and New England trains, which off the layout use a junction to the west to head north back to Canada, whereas the east yard is just Conrail trains heading back to and from the Boston area. So if we go back to the About page, I'm going to click on the visible track plan. Here we see in living color the whole visible part of the layout, and you can see this is where one of the helices comes back onto the layout, and the other one pops out here in this tunnel. I'll do a quick overview here. This area here we call the lower industrial area, and we call it the lower industrial area because it is reached by a 1% grade down from the Conrail Q&NE Junction, which is located here. It has quite a few large industries. We've got the bulk transfer on these 2 tracks. We've got a refrigerated warehouse here. We've got a rather large manufacturing plant for magazine paper, so it'll have chemicals in and boxcars in and boxcars out. We've got an engineering firm here, overhead crane with an indoor track as well. We have a very large grain mill here, 2 tracks, and there's a propane dealer here. At the far end of this zone, there's a furniture factory, and tucked in the corner here is a roofing shingles plant with 2 tracks. Heading up the 1% grade, as I mentioned before, we cross the double track Conrail main, the east and westbound mains, and continue on Quebec and New England trackage past the Interchange track. You see this track here, the inside track. That's the Interchange track where Conrail will drop off cars and pick up cars for interchange. There's in this zone, we call this the Interchange yard zone. There are a number of industries here as well, including a small sports yard. On this side, we have the one industry that's making sandpaper, so a lot of the small sand cars get delivered here, occasionally a boxcar of paper. Along this wall here, we have an abandoned power plant with an old track rusting in the weeds, and then some tracks inside buildings here. We have the shorter track here where coiled steel comes in. This is where they're making stampings. It's an automobile stamping plant. And this long track inside this building holds about 5 60-foot cars where stampings are shipped outbound. Here we have 3 car spots in a general warehouse, mostly boxcars. And at the far end here we have a cereals plant where we get grains, and flowers to the silos, and there's a track that goes inside the building for loading of finished packaged cereals. Beyond the interchange yard, we have a small engine service facility, 2 tracks inside and 1 outside. So trains coming in from Montreal from the north, their power lays over here till the morning when their northbound train leaves. But all the local switching assignments, their power is serviced here in this facility. Beyond this facility, we have another industrial zone. We call it the upper industrial zone. And again, this one's because it goes up a significant grade up around the hill here to get to these industries on the upper level. And here we have a steel transfer facility. This was the subject of a video series I did last year, 2 tracks inside. We've got a printing plant that receives newsprint cars from Canada. We've got a manufacturing plant here that takes in plastic pellets, and it ships. Sometimes it ships, very rarely, but there's a spot here at the very back for 86-foot boxcars, so it ships out lightweight but high volume products, let's say like plastic barrels, for example. So mostly pellet cars coming in, occasionally a tank car. And then one last industry here where it receives wood products, and it's manufacturing furniture as well. One service track here where the assigned locomotives will hang out between duties. So the main line, as we said before, double track Conrail main line, comes in and passes through the layout, passes by the interchange yard, crosses the diamonds, and heads back through the other helix down to staging below. Typically these trains will come in, and if it's a westbound, it'll stop here at this tower. Power will use these crossovers to reach into the interchange yard to pick up their cars and drop off their cars. And likewise, trains going the other direction will stop here, pull out, and use the crossover here to reach in and pick up their cars and drop off their cars on their way. The Quebec and New England train coming south from Montreal and heading back north, they, from a layout perspective, come from the west and head back to the west, because somewhere off the layout they take a junction to head back north. So they'll come out of staging here, but they will use the crossover here and run right into the interchange yard. The longest track here is about 18 cars long. They do have to double over because there's sometimes 24, 28 cars, but they originate and terminate here. And as I said before, power goes to the shop. So that's a quick description of the layout on paper. You can print this if you're on the YouTube site, and we're going to go down to the basement now and see it live in person, and you can follow along with your printout if you have it handy. And here we see the Conrail train coming out of staging and making its way upgrade around the visible part of the helix. This is one of my through trains that I keep for entertainment purposes. It doesn't really do any work on the layout, but it allows us to show off the layout with the train running through it. This is an automobile train. So while it's making its way around the layout, we can talk a little bit about the upper industrial zone here. Here we have the steel transfer facility with the 2 tracks inside. You see one track beside the building going off into a shadow. That's the tail track or switching lead for the balance of the tracks in this upper zone, as they are their switches face the opposite direction, so they're all switched from that end. The first track is the printing plant. You see it's got some newsprint cars parked in front of the 3 loading docks. Next over is the barrel manufacturing plant. You see some plastics cars unloading, and tucked in behind it is I believe there's a box car in there today. We'll have a look and we'll go around the other side. And behind these trees is the small furniture plant. And you can see off in the distance there's another train that's making its way around the layout. You can hear the crossing gates going off in the junction area. And there now, just in the distance, is our intermodal train. Again, we keep for entertainment purposes till it runs continuously. It's double stack containers and piggybacks. This is a joint pool train between the Quebec and New England and Conrail, so you'll see it's got Q&E power on the head end. And there we see the intermodal train crossing the road in the distance. Flashing lights aren't working because I haven't got them plugged in. And then they make their way down grade through the visible part of the helix. And there's our automobile train coming up again the other side. What a nice meet. From this angle we can get a better view of the furniture factory and the upper industrial zone, and the track to the side where the assigned locomotives will stay when they haven't got any work to do. Here's a rear view of the upper industrial zone. You can see the 86-foot boxcars tucked away in there at the last set of doors of that plant. And just beyond the crossing is Q&E diesel service facility. From this angle you can see how the track up to the upper industrial zone does indeed climb a significant grade. It looks worse than it is actually, because the two tracks to the right, the Conrail Main, are actually beginning their descent into the helix, so they're actually going down at the same time the industrial track is going up, so it looks twice as bad as it actually is. But still, it's enough of a grade that there's a limitation on the number of cars that a small locomotive can pull up that hill. Like most model railroaders, I have too much power for the layout, so we see quite a few examples of the smaller switching assignment locomotives here. Some are still inside the building, tucked away, but quite a bit of Q&E power. Now moving on to the interchange yard. This is the serial plant, where you can see the silos and manufacturing building. A bit of blue poking out of the building behind the trailer. And there is a boxcar being loaded with serial products. And you see the small 3-track interchange yard with the one long gravel departure track closest to us. And along the back wall we have the warehouse with 3 loading doors, and off in the distance we have the stamping plant with the taller building accepting coiled steel cars, and the buildings at the back filling up 60-foot cars with automobile stampings. Down in front here you see the crossovers that the Conrail trains locomotives will use to cross over and make their way into the interchange yard to dig out cars and to drop off cars. This dirt road where you see the company vehicle is to access the signal bridge that I've yet to install here. So this is like a small interlocking area. There'll be a signal bridge here and another one off in the distance where the switch tower is that guards the movements in and out of the yard through these crossovers. And here we have a small little fishing hole that the operators in the tower can wander down to on break. Just a little bit of diversity in the scenery of the layout. Here we catch things cleaning again, making a lovely reflection in the pond. And off in the distance behind the interchange tracks and this now out of service power plant. We'll take a look at from a higher angle. There's the power plant, and you can see that track is just going back to nature, and it is also no longer connected to the main track. You see a few ties still buried in the ballast and slowly being overcome by weeds and grass. And there you see the interchange track between the two Conrail main tracks and the Q&NE main track. And this end of the interchange track ties in with the interlocking that protects the crossing tracks, diamonds, and crossovers to get in and out of the yard from the west. And here we have the junction between the Quebec and New England and double track Conrail main line, where we have a set of diamonds with a Q&NE crosses Conrail, plus all the crossovers that allow both the southbound Q&NE and the westbound Conrail to make set-offs and lift in the yard itself. And beside the junction area we have the sandpaper plant with a track long enough to hold about 5 sand cars, plus at the very back a spot that the occasional paper car will unload paper for sandpaper manufacturing. This crossing is equipped with active crossing gates, lights, flashers, gates, bell. You've been hearing that in the background as the trains pass. And here's a close-up view of the crossing area. There's the diamonds. Those are 12.5-degree crossings. And you see the crossover behind it for Q&NE trains to access the yard and for Conrail trains to access the interchange. These signal bridges are not operational, but they can be. This was a kit bash of various different parts. Those wires you see heading down to the signal box are actual wires from the signals. So at some point, when I have the nerve, I'm going to try and light them up. But they are ready to be used, just not connected or programmed in. The same can be said for this signal bridge, although even if I lit them up, given that they point towards a corner of the layout, I'm not sure that there'd be much benefit in lighting them up, because they really wouldn't be visible unless I'm using a camera on a GoPro. No one will ever see them. So industrial assignments or transfers making their way from the interchange yard down to the lower industrial zone after they pass through the junction, make their way through this little forest on the left, and you can see, compared to the Conrail main line, they're already starting to make their descent down the 1% grade. The Conrail trains continue off into the distance and eventually cross the creek on a set of bridges, as does the Q&E track on a truss bridge. The Conrail trains make their way into staging, and the Q&E trains make their way to the lower industrial area, which we'll take a look at next. Here's a closer view of the shingles plant, with one track going inside with paper supplies, and behind the boxcar you see there is a spot for a tank car, and over to the right other roofing granules that come in various covered hoppers. To the far right you can see the Conrail main line tucking its way into the helix, heading down to staging, and then off to the left the Q&E industrial track heads its way past the furniture plant on towards the lower industrial yard. A view from the other side of the bridges. Again, you can see that the Q&E track is a bit lower than the Conrail main as it continues its way downhill. We saw some of this in the last video. This is the newest bit of scenery on the layout. And again, the furniture plant spur is a bit lower than the main track as well, because the main track is still on 1% grade here, but the spur inside the building has to be level, so you can see it's sinking into the mud underneath the building. Here's the switch tower, controlling movements in and out of the lower yard. This is the least scenic area of the layout, so it's still missing its basic ground cover, but it does have a coat of paint that simulates ground color and road color. Building flats along the back act as backdrop for the industrial area around the yard. Right in front of us is the propane distributor. A lot more detail to come as I have time. In the background you can see that very large grain elevator. That's a kit bash of 6 of the Walters grain mill kits, and there's 2 tracks next to it. Together those 2 tracks can hold about 10 cars or so. There's another view of the grain mill in the background, and beside it some industrial offices, and we have our engineering fabrication plant with an overhead crane for different kinds of products coming and going. One track inside the building as well, and beyond it is the very large magazine paper manufacturing plant. This was based on an actual collection of buildings in Thorold, Ontario. I'd been down there and had taken quite a few photos, and I tried to approximate with Google and some other sketches that I had as best I could of a fair representation of the prototype. So there's 4 tracks for that industry. We've got slurry tank cars, we've got kaolin hoppers, there's another track for other kinds of miscellaneous chemicals, and 2 tracks inside for rough paper coming in and finished paper going out. And off to the right, to the left, sorry, is a refrigerated produce warehouse. So that will take refrigerated boxcars, and beside it 2 tracks for bulk distribution, 1 track of plastic pellets and 1 track for liquid commodities. You may have noticed around the fascia of the layout I have the track plan laid out, and on each of the lines is a track ID, and this is useful for new operators enjoying an operating session with us to orient themselves and understand where cars are to be picked up or placed according to the switch lists. And now a few close-ups. just to finish off. Like I said before, this part of the layout in the lower industrial zone has not received any detail, so there's quite a ways to go yet. See, the two boxcar tracks are actually elevated, and they enter the building at a higher elevation than the tracks to the side. The roadway truck loading dock is also elevated. This is exactly as the prototype has it. I thought that was a neat feature to incorporate into this model. It shows that not everything is flat. And someday we'll get some detail in there. Lots of opportunity for bits and pieces of structural steel and formwork. And you see a little furniture van loading up at the loading dock. A lot of work went into adding detail into the rock formations tucked into the distance. Hard to see unless you're crouching down and looking underneath the bridges at the rock work. All of this rock work, by the way, was hand carved using basically drywall mud and repeated staining and dry brushing with white to pick up the edges. All of the trees you see here are super trees, all individually decorated with ground foam. There's about 1,000 trees so far on the layout, planted one by one. So this was basically a kit for a signal bridge that I planted two separate signal kits on top of. I also added the wooden deck, stained it. This area in this corner is actually a piece I salvaged from an earlier version of the layout. It kind of fit the curve nicely, and I thought it'd be a shame to not reuse all that hand-carved rock, so I blended it in to the scenery here, and it carries on life in another layout. There's our lake. More detail to be added there. I recently bought some cattails that we'll be planting give it some life, or more life. Still a couple of spots on the layout where I haven't decided what I'm going to add. This is one of those spots. For now, it's a handy little table for us when we're operating to put our switch lists, but eventually you can see the bulldozers there is impatiently waiting to get going on construction of whatever it is that's going to go there. This backdrop is a rather flimsy stand-in. It's the old Walters paper backdrops. It does the trick for now, but eventually that should be upgraded to something more modern. You can see it's quite dated. I also have to figure out how to treat this corner. Eventually, perhaps some of the trees to cover that sharp angle. And as you heard from the earlier part of the video, quite a few of these locomotives have sound systems in them, and when we have an operating session, it can get loud. I don't have all the locomotives equipped because it can get too much after a 3-hour operating session. If anyone is curious, there's the Q&E roaster consists of 3 SW1500s, 2 MP15 DCs, 2 MP15 ACs, 10 GP38s, and 4 -8-40Bs, and 5 cabooses, sorry, 6 cabooses, 5 standard vision plus the 1 transfer cabooses, plus the 2 GP9s. I think I have room for one more on the roster, possibly a chopped nose GP9, but everything is painted and operational. Most of the power sits hidden in the staging yard. You can see here in the East Conrail yard there are 4 trains staged and ready to go, each with their own set of power and caboose. And same thing on the West staging yard, where there are 2 other Q&E trains staged, plus 3 other Conrail trains. I like this view because it connects across the whole layout. This is an at-grade crossing, but the road rises as it heads off into the distance, and the at-grade crossing there is the upper level industrial lead. Too often we leave all our roads at the same level, but the real world is 3-dimensional, and we have to reflect that with grades on our tracks and grades on our roads as well. Another little spot here on the layout that's begging to have some kind of detail next to the road, but it sits over a tunnel portal, so obviously can't be a gas station. I'll have to figure that one out. This view is nice as well because over in the distance you can't see the aisleway, but you can see the bridges on the other side of the aisle, so if you place the camera just right, you can catch a train crossing the bridge at the same time you're looking down the street. And there you have it. Hope you've enjoyed this tour of the Quebec and New England.